basically we'll start about chromatography. Okay, chromatography. So what is chromatography? Chromatography is basically separation of macromolecules from a mixture. So this is the primary. Okay, so this is basically like the main objective of chromatography. It is separation of macromolecules from a mixture of compounds. Okay, so just a second. I don't know, color and thickness. Get a thick. Is it okay now? I'll take a thicker ink. This is perfect. Yeah, perfect, fine. Can you stop the presentation? Okay, I'll wait. Okay, I think there was a technical glitch. Anyway, wait, I'll start my presentation. Yeah, so it came. Nice. Fine. So chromatography is separation of macromolecules from a mixture. Now, what macromolecules can you separate? You can separate DNA, you can separate RNA, you can separate you can separate proteins, or you can separate charged ions. So today we'll for example, suppose in protein chromatography. Okay, so you have E. coli cells. And you have overexpressed them with IPTG. In these E. coli cells, you have a E. coli genome. This is nucleoid. You have plasmid here. This plasmid has your GOI. What is GOI? It's gene of interest. So this gene of interest, you have the restriction enzyme sites at both end. So it was a ordinary plasmid. You have a gene of interest. You added restriction enzymes. So it cuts this at two end. It cuts the plasmid and it incorporates the gene of interest in this plasmid. You have a promoter sequence here. That is inducible. What happened? Okay, that is inducible by IPTG or IPTG is what is IPTG? IPTG is a inducing agent. IPTG mimics allolactose. So why do we use IPTG and not use allolactose? Because allolactose is degradable. IPTG is not degradable. So you use IPTG, you don't have to use it like after every cell division. So you prepare a cell broth. Okay, very bad anyway. So you grow E. coli cells in a beaker. Okay, you use IPTG here after growing the cells after the OD. Okay, so after the OD reaches around 0.8 around, you use IPTG over it. Okay, after the IPTG, the cells overexpress your gene, and from it also overexpresses the protein. Now the experimental challenge comes is, how do you isolate your protein from a group of proteins? There are many biophysical techniques to isolate a protein, the major being chromatography. Major technique for isolation of proteins. You can explain chromatography as a mesh. Suppose you made tea. Okay, not bad, very bad drawing. Anyway, suppose you made tea in a pot. Okay, so you have tea leaves as well. So you need to isolate the water from the leaves. You pass the leaf through a mesh filter. You pass it over it. You will collect the fresh tea and leaves will be collected here. So this is just a separation technique, how you separate your water from the tea leaves. That is the same way we use chromatography. This is just the basic, like absolutely basic idea. Yeah, so one of the major techniques, one of the technique that is present. Also you can use a paper, like, yeah. So we'll study there are 4 types of chromatography that we'll come across. We have affinity. What happened? We have affinity chromatography. We have ion exchange chromatography. We have gel exclusion chromatography, or it is also known as size exclusion chromatography. Then we have desalting. This is not exactly a chromatography, but it is a technique. We come across like the desalting in just few minutes. Affinity chromatography, ion exchange chromatography, there is separation based on charges. Based on charge. You have separation here in affinity chromatography. You have separation based on affinity. You have separation based on charge, separation based on affinity, and separation based on size of the molecule. Okay. Now coming to the first chromatography in our list, we have affinity chromatography. Okay. Yeah. Now in affinity chromatography, as we explained earlier, that we have like already, like suppose you have, okay, affinity chromatography. So suppose you have a cell culture that you have induced with IPTG. Okay. Now you have overexpressed your protein. Overexpressed your protein. Now what you need to do is, you have to, like after overexpressing your protein, you have to make, okay, this cell lysate contains hundreds of different proteins. Hundreds of different proteins. Now you need to separate your one protein of interest. Then use affinity chromatography. Okay. So yeah, the first thing about affinity chromatography is that the protein that you are making, the protein should contain a 6 histidine tag attached to it. Histidine, and then you will have the rest of your protein. So the protein should have a 6 histidine tag attached to it. If you want to isolate it using NINT column. What is a column, by the way? Okay, a column is just a glass. Okay, a column is made of glass, or it is made of polycarbonate. This is not very important. Okay, inside the column you have beads and everything. Inside the column you have beads. Okay, you put supernatant from it. Okay, how many kinds of beads are there? Number one, you have GST beads, that is glutathione S transferase. Okay, why we need the histidine tag? I'll come over it in details. Okay, just a few minutes. So you have glutathione S transferase. Okay, then you have MBP binding. Then you have MVP binding protein, which binds the maltose, like which binds to maltose. Then you have NINTA beads, which binds histidine. This glutathione S transferase, this maltose, this histidine, they are all incorporated in your gene of interest. So when you need to isolate your protein, I'll come through each of the topics in details in some time. But when you have to isolate a protein, okay, you have to have this histidine 6 or GST or MBP in front of your protein. This can be a protein of interest, but this has to be in front of the protein. After separation of protein, you can just add a cleaver and you can just cleave this histidine part, and you will get your protein of interest. Okay. Okay. So these are the various tags that is present. This histidine. Let's focus on one thing. Let's focus on histidine tag, which is the most commonly used tag. The histidine with tag which is present there, it can be a N-terminal bound, it can be C-terminal bound, Generally we use 6 histidine tags, like 6 histidine before protein of interest. Okay. Yeah, that enables isolation of the protein. About affinity chromatography, we get around 90% purification of proteins. Okay. And why it is required for the separation of the protein using affinity columns. Okay, so this is a affinity column. Okay, it contains beads inside them. Okay, now supernatant from above. The supernatant contains the cell lysate, or in more generalized term, it is a mixture of macromolecule. Here protein, it can also be DNA or RNA, but here we are focusing on proteins. Okay, so I have to isolate a specific protein from the cell lysate. This portion is called, what I discussed above. Okay, wait for a second, technical glitch. Okay, so these are beads. This what is present there, this is a, this can be made of, wait for a second. Yeah, so this is column, and this is the open area where you put cell lysate, and this is where the purified protein comes. You obtain your purified protein from here. It comes in a dropwise fashion. Okay, now about the beads. The beads is basically made of agarose. They're agarose beads. Okay, NINTA agarose beads more specifically. Okay, Yeah, got it. So there are three parts in it. The number one is nickel, or specifically Ni2 plus. It can also be CO2 plus, okay, but this is for separation of some other, like this nickel is used for histidine separation, okay. You can also use cobalt 2 plus for some other tags. The number two thing is NTA, nitrio triacetic acid. Nitrio triacetic acid, or in short NTA. Then you have agarose. Agarose is the base material, okay. Yeah, so now just a second. Okay. Now this so now this is what this part is very important. You have to stay focused in this part. You have NCH2O CH2 it's CH actually O CH2 O. This is nickel 2 plus, okay, and this bead that is present, this CH, it is bound to agarose. So this is the third part, which is the base or the agarose. This is the NTA, okay, or the nitrio triacetic acid, NTA. This part is nickel, okay. Generally nickel is bound using coordinate bond to this oxygen and the nitrogen ions, and on the other hand it is bound to 2H2O, water. So this is basically what a agarose bead looks like. Now we'll come into the importance of the histidine tag. Nickel, the main thing that you have to remember is nickel binds histidine. This is the main funda of separation using nickel chromatography, like NiNTA bead chromatography. So for example, suppose you have suppose 6 histidine tag, okay. You have histidine, 6 histidine tags. Now histidine has a like N charge here, okay. Now what this nickel does, now what this nickel does is like in place of binding to water molecule, it binds to alternative histidines. Like it binds to, suppose these are 1 2 3 4 5 6, nickel binds to alternative histidines and then it is bound to NTA as shown above, which is bound to agarose. Now these alternative histidines are also bound to nickel Ni2 plus. This alternative, like this histidine, like this histidine and this histidine is also bound to Ni2 plus. This histidine and this histidine is also bound to Ni2 plus, which in turn is bound to NTA and to agarose. This is the importance of histidine having a 6 histidine tag in front of your protein. Yeah. Now suppose you have a histidine tag and you have your protein of interest and you have 6 histidine tag. When it is passed along the beads, this nickel which is present bound to NTA, this histidine gets attached to this nickel, and when you pass the supernatant from here, the histidine proteins gets bind to the beads and rest of the protein, like rest of the like elution, or which is also known as like the flow through, is released from above. Now we'll see like a linear detail of how this is done in a stepwise fashion. Also this is also known as this affinity chromatography is also known as IMIC. Okay, which is short form for immobilized metal ion chromatography. Because of the nickel which is present, which is immobilized actually, which is like the immobilized nickel is bound, so this is also known as IMIC or immobilized metal ion chromatography, which is basically the same nickel NTA bound affinity chromatography. So now we'll come into the stepwise fashion of how affinity chromatography is done. Affinity chromatography is done. The first step which is present is NiNTA loaded beads. They are present in the cylinder. Like this. This is already available in the market. So beads are already there. Like there are lots of beads actually. I can't show everything. Like I can't draw every bead that is present. But there are lots of beads which is present in there. This is fully packed and densed. So this is what we get from the market. The second step is you have to rinse, and this is like preserved in 20%. This is preserved in 20% alcohol. Okay, can anybody guess why alcohol is used? Write in the comment box. How? Okay. Okay, so I'll answer every question, like I'll answer your questions, but okay, so why it binds to histidine rather than it binds with water, and why alternatively? Okay, so yeah, so why does it bounce to histidine and why rather than water? Because histidine has a greater affinity towards like histidine has a greater affinity towards nickel. Okay, because histidine has a N group na, so it has a greater affinity towards nickel. So when you give histidine added protein into the column, the histidine specifically binds to the nickel and it removes water. So water binds. Okay, let me clear it up. Okay, so based on affinity wise, histidine has a greater affinity compared to water for Ni2+ ions. So when there is no histidine environment, when you have a no histidine environment, nickel 2+ is bound to water. Okay, when you give histidine, it removes water. Why does it removes water? Because it has greater affinity towards nickel than water. Then it binds to nickel. So that answers your question. The next question that you have is why it only does with histidine tags. Can we use amino acid and then make a bead corresponding to that amino acid? Okay, so okay, you can make amino acid and then make beads corresponding to the amino acid, but the main thing that is here is you have a protein. Okay, that protein, you need to isolate that protein. Obviously you can make amino acid and stuff, but that amino acid doesn't have a biological function. For example, say in the case you need to isolate a specific soluble protein that is present in the cytoplasm, okay, in the bacterial cytoplasm. Like you have a suppose you have a toxin gene. Okay, you have a bacterial toxin, you genetically isolated, like you did a restriction cut, you put that toxin gene into the bacteria, and you have to collect a lot of purified toxin protein. Okay, so suppose you have a toxin protein. Okay, you have a toxin gene. Okay, why do you have a toxin gene? Because suppose you need to find the structure, of toxin gene. Like you have to find the structure of the toxin protein. Okay, suppose the toxin is VAP-BC4. This is a protein that I worked on in my lab. Suppose it is a VAP-C4. VAP-C4 is a MTB protein, Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Okay, tuberculosis. So why do you need to find the structure of a toxin protein? Because like there are many toxin proteins present in the Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Okay, so now when you have like now finding the structure of this toxin, like this Mycobacterium tuberculosis, they use this toxin protein to get rid of antibiotics and everything. Okay, so now you need to find the structure of the toxin in order to aid in further research about Mycobacterium tuberculosis and about the toxin, and knowing the structure of the toxin can help you to make some antibiotics or make some macromolecules specific for that toxin protein, and for like after knowing that the bacteria can't evade the antibiotic resistance. Okay, so this is the main, suppose this is your main research proposal. This is your main research proposal. Okay, now for that you need a lot of VAP-BC, VAP-BC4. okay, VAP-BC4 being the toxin protein. Okay, so now you have to find, for a lot of VAP-BC4 you need to generate a lot of protein. You have to generate a lot of protein. For that you need overexpression in a model organism. Okay, in a model organism being E. coli, it can be yeast, it can be baculovirus, it can be mammalian gene, it can be mammalian cell line. Okay, mammalian cell line means like HEK. Okay, human okay, so HEK, so this is human kidney cell line, human kidney cells. This is a mammalian cell line. So you can isolate you can overexpress the protein in various organisms: E. coli, yeast, baculovirus, mammalian cell. So the protein that you need, the protein that you have to overexpress has a fixed structure, like has a fixed sequence. Okay, so you can't change the sequence. You cannot change the sequence. If you change the sequence of the protein, the biological function will be lost. Okay, and finding like it will not form a struct, like it will not give a crystal structure, and like crystal structure you can't find the structure because so you can't change the sequence. For that reason, what you can do is, suppose you have the protein, this is the protein, suppose this is a polypeptide, this is a protein. Okay, okay, now you can't make any difference, can't make any change in the structure. You cannot add any amino acid, in the structure, okay, of the protein. Then it will completely lose its biological function. What you can do is, you have an N-terminal site, you have a C-terminal site. Of every protein you have an N-terminal and C-terminal site. Suppose you add 6-histidine in front of your N-terminal site. Okay.
Rishabh,
yeah, sure.
Yeah, Bevas here.
Hi.
My question is that only, like, why we are only tagging the protein with 6-histidine? Why not any other amino acid, and then like make a bead of that amino acid? Like as you said, like NINTA is like NI is more attract, means it forms more interaction with the histidine. So my question was that only, like, why only histidine tags? Can we use other amino acid to make these tags and use
Oh,
bead
sure, sure,
corresponding?
sure, sure.
That
So yeah, so actually I didn't got your question. So yeah, so what I was saying is, like, if you make 6 histidine, then you can cut. So how can you remove histidine tags? Okay, so you have proteins. So you have trypsin. I'll come to your question, Bivas, in just a second. So you have, if you add trypsin here, after purification, if you add trypsin cuts this, and you get your normal protein, like N terminal and C terminal, without histidine tag. Histidine tag is lost. It's lost. Okay. Okay. Fine. So now, your question is, why can't we make another, like, other amino acid and bind? Okay. So histidine has affinity for nickel, as I showed. Histidine has a group. Histidine has this group. So this specifically binds to nickel plus, nickel 2 plus. Okay. This is for histidine binding to nickel 2. You can also add MBP, okay, or maltose binding protein in front of your protein. Okay, suppose you have N terminal, you have C terminal, you add a MBP. Now in the bead that is present, the bead has MBP tag, like you have MBP binding. Suppose you have MBP binding beads. Okay, so maltose binding, so these are like the standard experimental procedures. Okay, so you can add like 6 tryptophans in front of a protein, and you can then check it using your column, but I don't think it will bind to nickel. So it has been shown that like histidine specifically binds to nickel, and it has been a regular experimental procedure. Okay, other amino acid or other sequences, so this group that is there now, this group is required to bind to nickel. Other amino acid that do not have this group do not bind to nickel actually. So if you want to use other amino acid, you have to add a protein. So you can have MBP you can have MBP or maltose binding protein that binds to maltose binding beads. So you have MBP and then the protein, so it binds to the MBP binding beads, and then you can isolate it. So one thing is MBP, one thing is histidine tag, other you have GST. You can have glutathione S transferase. This is a short amino acid sequence. This is a amino acid sequence, or you can also say it's a polypeptide actually. Yeah, so it's a polypeptide which is bound in, okay, glitch. So it's bound in front of N terminal. So this you can bind, like this GST or glutathione S transferase which is present there. It is bound to beads that contain glutathione S transferase binding tags, or glutathione S transferase binding beads. So this glutathione S transferase, which is a polypeptide, it binds to this one. So these are the specific lab, like these are the specific tags that have been experimentally validated. You have histidine, you have maltose binding protein, you have glutathione S transferase. So these are the 3 things that are experimentally validated that binds to the beads. Can make other amino acid, but yeah. Can I use antibody for a protein? Yeah, so antibody for a protein. Okay, so I think I answered Preeti's question as well. How is histidine tag bound to your protein of interest? So when you clone that gene, suppose you have a amino acid sequence. Suppose for example K, L, S, A, M, D. Suppose random, like you have a random protein sequence. Now when you generate the protein sequence, you add H, 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 H. So you add this, And then you have the protein sequence, for example alanine, valine, leucine, isoleucine, and everything like lysine, okay, everything. So now you have, this is your protein, this is your histidine tag, this is your protein, this is your histidine tag. When you make the protein, now you add histidine tags, and this is not made by any lab, this is sent to the company. So when you have this protein of interest, you send this sequence along with 6 histidine tag, the company will make this entire gene. So you just put that gene into a plasmid. This is genetically made, actually, like this is pre-made for the purpose of isolation. Antibody for a protein, yeah, using antibody is one of the main things. So you can actually use antibodies. So like there are beads that are bound with antibodies also. So you have a protein of interest that comes and binds to the antibodies. Done. So, but you know what, like using there is one disadvantage in using this as well. Okay, the disadvantage being this columns that are found now, okay, these are pre-made columns. Okay, these are pre-made columns. Now, oh, my OneNote is having some, these are pre-made columns. Okay, so now how can, like this is not theoretically impossible, but practically it is very costly to bind an antibody to a NTA. Okay, NTA and then to a resin, or suppose like antibody directly to a resin. So I don't think there are many antibodies that can bind to the resin. Okay, so using antibody, firstly antibodies are very costly. Okay, so firstly antibodies are very costly. Secondly, you know, antibodies do not always, like antibodies do not always bind to resin. These are two of the challenges. But if you want to make an antibody bind to a resin for a specific protein for separation, you can always do it. That is like not theoretically impossible, but it's practically not feasible actually. So yeah, I think if you have any question, write in the chat box. I'll answer it within few minutes. Yeah, so what I was saying is, okay, now okay, so now we'll go into the stepwise fashion of how to do a affinity chromatography. The first step which is there is you have to rinsing of the column. Okay, so the column, like the pre-made column, is actually you know, it contains alcohol, 20% alcohol. So alcohol that is present there, it prevents the column so it prevents the column to have fungal growth, so this is for, you know, preservation purpose. This is for preservation purpose. So you have to rinse the column with water. This is the first step. The second step being equilibration buffer. Equilibration. Okay. Why do we equilibrate? Because the column which is present there, okay, it has water in it, because we rinsed it with water. Now we need to change it to the same buffer that the lysate is made. So the cell lysate that you make na, cell lysate, it is made in a specific buffer. Okay, so it's made in a specific buffer. So now you are changing the environment which is present inside the column from water to the buffer that the cell lysate is made, in order so that the protein doesn't get a shock. Suppose the cell lysate is made in a buffer, you put that buffer into a column and the column contains water, so there is a change in pH and change in environment, so the protein can get a shock and it can precipitate or anything. In order to prevent that, we change the water medium to the buffer medium. Okay, the same buffer in which the cell lysate is made. So this process is called equilibration. The third is, adding supernatant. Adding supernatant. Okay, so you add supernatant, which is the cell lysate, suppose in our case. Now the fourth one is, so after adding the supernatant, okay, you will get the eluted fractions. Eluted fractions. The protein which has nickel bind in, like the protein that has the histidine tags, they are already bound to the beads. Okay, the rest of the protein that is present, they are eluted out of it. So they are eluted out of it. These are the rest of the protein that we don't need. Okay, we don't need. And the protein of our interest has already bound to the columns. So this is adding supernatant. Then what you need to do is you need to wash. Okay, before coming to the wash, I'll tell you a concept of imidazole. Okay, imidazole is a compound that has greater affinity nickel, Ni2+, okay, technical glitch, that has a greater affinity for Ni2+. Okay, so now when you add imidazole, it removes your protein of, like when imidazole comes, it removes your protein, and you can get that protein as an elution fragment. Okay, now coming to the washing, you wash with a low imidazole containing buffer. Okay, so yeah, so can't we dry out the water totally rather than converting it to a buffer? So the protein, the cell lysate that is present, that is in some buffer. So if you dry out the, see, firstly you can dry out, okay, but there is one problem associated with it. This is a column now. So how, like, you can't dry out, because once you dry out that water, the resin that is present, it also dries out. So you can't actually dry out the buffer inside. You have to have something, you have to have some solute always present inside them. So when you are preserving that column also, you are putting 20% alcohol. Yeah, so understood. Yeah, fine. So yeah, so low imidazole concentration. Low imidazole, what it does, it removes non-specific bindings. Suppose there is a protein now. Okay, in the sequence it has histidine. Suppose there is 2 histidine present there. If this 2 histidine somehow, like, it is not our protein of interest, but if this 2 histidine somehow gets attached to the nickel 2+, we don't want this. Okay, so in order for this and this binding that is present, suppose 6 histidine binding to a nickel, okay, has a greater affinity, like like has a greater affinity than 2-histidine binding to a nickel. Okay. So it has greater affinity than 2-histidine that is binding to a protein. So these are termed as non-specific bindings. So in order to remove the non-specific bindings which has a very low energy, we use low concentration of imidazole. This is a step. Now the final step, which is elution. Okay, you elute with high imidazole buffer that has around 300 millimolar imidazole. Yeah, around 300 millimolar of imidazole. So this is elution with high imidazole buffer. So what this high imidazole does is, suppose there is a NTA, okay, nickel, you have protein. Imidazole will come because the concentration is okay. So because the concentration is too high, imidazole will come, okay, and it will remove that protein. Okay, so after adding imidazole, you will get protein in the elution fragments. That is what is the importance of imidazole. So you get the elution fragments. So what we did first, we did equilibration with buffer. Then we added our cell lysate, or you can also say it as supernatant. The third step being wash, in order to remove non-specific binding. Okay, the fourth step, okay, can you explain the wash step again? Yeah, sure. So another question is sure, I'll explain the wash step. And the fourth step that is present is elution. So after elution, you will get your protein of interest. In the eluted fragment. So you can collect this in a Eppendorf tube or anything that you need. You can collect it in a Eppendorf tube. Okay. This is all about affinity chromatography. Don't have anything like more in it. There are few of the things that is also important. Firstly, okay, so I'll come into the questions, but if the protein, like Bhivash is asking that, but if the protein has continuous 6-histidine sequence and it is not a protein of interest, we want how to tackle that. Okay, so one of the major thing that is present here is that, firstly, there are two things. Firstly, this is very unlikely that there will be 6-histidine continuously in some protein of in some protein. So when you are using E. coli or yeast or anything, okay, just a second. Okay, so when you are using E. coli or yeast or anything, you already know what proteins are there. You already know all the proteins that are present there. Okay, you did a bioinformatics analytics before that, so you know what protein is there. I don't think there is 6-histidine continue. Okay, so I don't think there are 6-histidine that are present in a protein of interest, but if it is there also, like 6-histidine present in your protein of interest, if it is there also, then first thing that you can do is, firstly, it is very unlikely. Then secondly, you can increase your histidine, like it can increase your histag. Okay, you can increase your histag from 6, you make it to 12 or make it to 18. Then it will also increase the purity. Suppose you have a 12 histidine or a 18 histidine tag before the protein. Okay, so the 6 histidine that are bound to the nickel NTA columns, you can use a higher concentration of washing, like imidazole in washing buffer, to get rid of them, and then you can use 300 or 500 millimolar imidazole, like a high concentration imidazole buffer, to elute your fragments. Yeah, but it is very unlikely to have 6 histidine present in a protein. If there is any, you will get to know before experiment using bioinformatics. Can you explain the wash step again? Yeah, washing step is, suppose there is protein. Okay, so there are histidine present in the protein structure as well, 2 histidine, 3 histidine, continuously there are histidine present. So if they bind to the nickel column, okay, this binding is very non-specific. Okay, the binding is very non-specific, like it is very weak binding. So when you use a less, like a very little concentration of imidazole, those lesser, like the less concentration of imidazole that is present there, it will go and it will remove that non-specific binding that are present. But the specific bindings that are like those having like the 6 histidine present, or those have like the 12 histidine bound to the nickel, they will not be affected because the imidazole concentration is very low. They will be only eluted when you have a high concentration of imidazole. Okay, so we can watch a little video on how there is like what is the basis of affinity chromatography.
Separation in affinity chromatography depends upon the reversible adsorption of biomolecules through biospecific interactions on the ligand. Most affinity chromatography experiments are performed in 3 main stages: equilibration, sample application and wash, and dilution. The first step is the equilibration of the stationary phase to the desired start conditions. The second step is sample application and wash. The goal in this step is to bind the target molecules and wash out all unbound material. Non-binding molecules will pass through in the flow-through during washing with binding buffer. In the third step, elution, biomolecules are released from the biospecific ligand into the elution buffer by change in the buffer composition. A common way is to increase pH of the buffer.
So you are getting an eluted fraction here. So this is all about how it is bound and how it is not bound. This is affinity chromatography, like the basic concept of binding of our protein of interest. The next, okay, now we have to in short, you have ion exchange chromatography. You have ion exchange chromatography. This is when you have to separate based on charge. You have to separate based on charge. Okay. So in ion exchange chromatography, the thing is same. Okay. So one thing I forgot to say is this bead that is present now, the beads that are present here, they are also known as stationary phase. Stationary phase. The buffer that is going, like this is mobile phase because it's mobile. These are 2 of the terminologies that you need. So yeah, now starting with ion exchange chromatography, what you actually need, what in ion exchange chromatography you have a resin. Okay, so there are 2 types of ion exchange chromatography. Okay, anion exchange cation exchange. In anion exchange chromatography, you exchange anions. In cation exchange chromatography, you exchange cations. Ion exchange chromatography uses, the first thing you can use is for charged compound. Charged compound. Next, you can use it for polar. You can use it for polar compounds as well. Polar, suppose polar amino acids. Okay, you can separate polar amino acids or macromolecules. Macromolecules. The next thing that you can do is separate ions. Separation of ions. This, like, separation of ion is majorly used in water treatment plants. Water treatment plants for checking for some harmful ions. Okay, but you can separate DNA. You can separate RNA. You can separate protein and macromolecule. Macromolecule. We'll be focusing on the protein part for this thing. So what you have is, first I give you the concept of pH. It's the negative logarithm of hydrogen ion concentration, like, you know, acidic pH, acidic or basic. You also have Pi, which is the isoelectric. I have isoelectric point, okay, or Pi that is present. So if the pH of the protein is greater than, if the pH of the buffer is greater than the Pi of the protein will be present as a negative charge. Negative charge. Yeah. For example, you have NH, you know, H3N bind C. Okay. Bind. Suppose you have the protein. Just a second. One second. Okay. Yeah. Hi. So you have NH3 plus, you have COO minus. This is present in Pi form. So suppose when the pH is more, okay, that is, it has a lot of, like, the OH ions, like the OH negative ions are more, the protein releases a H plus. Okay, and the protein that is present, it gets converted into H2 and COO minus. So ultimately the protein is found in a negative charge. So when pH is greater than Pi, the protein is found in a negative state. Same goes for pH less than Pi. Okay, your protein is found in a positive state. Positive state. You know, before starting ion exchange chromatography. So yeah, so the main part of ion exchange chromatography is, suppose you have a resin, okay, which is attached. Suppose in case of cation exchange chromatography, you are changing. In case of cation exchange chromatography, you have a resin, okay, Suppose this resin is agarose. This is same in case of affinity and this thing. It can also be cellulose, agarose or cellulose. It is mainly used. It is bound to a compound. It is bound to a negatively charged compound. Okay, this is the bead. This forms the bead. Okay, as there are negative charge compound, you can expect some positive charge compound to be present on the surface of the beads. Okay, now in case of the column, you have these beads present all over it. You give the supernatant. Okay, suppose you have to isolate a protein that has positive charge. Okay, suppose you have C plus, okay, that is bound to a protein like C plus. C plus is some charged ion that is present in the protein. It is not bound to protein, but it is some positive charge that is present in the protein. Okay, so C plus, there will be an exchange between these things because of the affinity difference. Oh, why is it not going down? Yeah, there will be a change. Then you will get R bind to A minus bind to C plus. Suppose like C plus. Okay. Yeah. So this is change of anions, and the B plus which is attached there, it will go down in elution. C plus is your protein of interest. This is the fundamental piece of chromatography. You have more things actually. So yeah. For example, so we'll go in a stepwise fashion. Okay. First step is equilibration. Achha, why does the exchange of ions occur? Okay, sure, I'll explain it. Suppose so everything is based on affinity only. Okay, so suppose you have beads. Okay, you have R resin which is attached to a negatively charged ion. This is the bead. You have positive charge attached to the beads, like it stays like that, like some positive charge are always attached to it. So for example, like Na plus, sodium plus is attached to it. Now you give supernatant in it. Okay, supernatant has a lot of protein, that has positive charge. Okay, the concentration of this protein is so high that it goes and it removes this NaCl and the protein gets bind to it. A minus binds to protein plus. The exchange is purely because of the concentration difference and the affinity difference. Because the protein also has a positive charge, it will still bind to the negative charge resin. Okay, sodium also has a positive charge, it also binds to negative charge resin. But if you put a lot of protein in it that has a positive charge, it will because see, this binding is not a constant process, it's a dynamic process. Every time when Na plus is bound now to Ra minus, it's a dynamic process. Every time few of the Na plus is getting removed, other Na plus is coming. So this is a dynamic process, it's not a static process. So when the environment has a lot of Na plus in it, it will replace a Na plus with a Na plus only. But if you give a supernatant which has a large concentration of protein, like which has a large concentration of protein with a positive charge, number one reason, it has higher affinity. Number two reason, it is concentration abundance. So this protein comes and it preferentially removes the Na and it binds to it. Understood? Cool. Okay, so coming to the stepwise fashion, you have equilibration, that is same as that of affinity chromatography. How will you isolate protein of interest from the protein itself? Okay, I'll come into it. Why is it now erasing anything? I don't know what happened. Okay, I'll simply cut it. Anyway, okay. First step is equilibration. Okay. Number two step is injection of protein. Injection of protein. In this step, your protein is already bound to beads. Next step is washing. This is the same as before. You wash with buffer, or you wash with NaCl in order to get rid of non-specific bindings or weak bindings. Yeah, non-specific bindings or weak bindings. Number 4 step is elution. This is in relation with Preeti's question. How do you elute your protein? Here now, at the elution step, you have protein positive bound to negative beads, raising negative charge, negative beads. This is already bound here. Now you charge a high concentration of high. Now you use buffer. Okay, so this is already bound. Now you use buffer which has high NaCl concentration. What this NaCl will does is NaCl will break into Na plus and Cl minus as present in the ionic form, ions. This high concentration of Na, what it will does is it will again, like you have a high concentration of NaCl now. Also this is a dynamic process, protein is binding everything. So when you have high concentration of Na plus will specifically exchange again with protein. So at the first case, why does Na got exchanged with protein? Because there was high concentration of protein or the positive charge in the protein in the first place. Now you have all the proteins that are present, they have already bound to the beads. Now you charge it with a high concentration of Na plus. So when the system has high concentration of Na plus, it will specifically remove those protein and the Na will bind. So it is done in a, so the NaCl concentration is increased from 100 nanomolar gradually to 1 molar, and in this process what you get is gradually your protein gets eluted. This is the basic funda of ion exchange chromatography.
Rishabh,
let me recap.
I have one question.
Okay, wait for a second. I have a question. Increase the volume. Yeah, sure. Say.
Yeah. So a protein can have both positive and negative charge group in itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So suppose if a pi of a protein, let's say suppose if a pi of a protein is 5.
Okay.
Okay, and we want to isolate.
PI is 5.
Protein. 5, yeah.
Yeah.
So we want to isolate this protein. So what we will be using, a pH more than 5 or a pH less than 5 to isolate?
Okay, so now a very good question. You can use both. Okay, it depends. Suppose you are making a buffer. I'll also tell you why you should use one above the other. Suppose you are making a buffer which is pH 7.0. So the pH is more than pi. Okay, the protein will be present in a negative form. You have to use anion exchange chromatography. You have to use anion exchange chromatography. Anion exchange chromatography. Okay. Now you are using a buffer which has a pi of 3.0. pH is less than pi. Protein is present in positive form. Protein has positive charge. Like, you know, positive charge means H3N plus protein COOH. Okay, protein has a positive charge. Here the protein has a negative charge, that is N, like H2N bound COO minus. So use a anion exchange chromatography. Okay, for this in anion exchange chromatography, what you have, technical glitch. Okay, okay, so in anion exchange chromatography, it is just the reverse thing. Okay, you have resin, it is bound to, in our case it was bound to a ion that has negative charge, but in anion exchange chromatography it will be bound to a positive charge. This is the reason. Okay, so now for example, normally it is bound to chlorine minus. You use the protein, it is exchanged with our protein. Okay, now you have Ra plus bound to our protein minus. Fine. Now you use NaCl again. Okay, you have Na plus and Cl minus. Don't have to worry about Na plus here. This Cl minus will go and it will exchange with this protein. So now you will have Ra plus, you have the bead, it will be bound to Cl minus and protein will be eluted. Protein will be eluted. This is anion exchange. So what is the difference between anion exchange and cation exchange chromatography? Just it is the bead difference. Okay, you have Ra plus here, that is resin attached to a positive charge ion. In cation exchange, it is resin attached to a negative charge ion. Negative charge will attract cations, here the positive charge will attract anion. So this is anion exchange chromatography. Now coming to the question, if a pi is 5, okay, oh, what is this happening? Okay, so now where is the, okay, so now for a protein which has a pi of 5, you can, if you use a buffer of 7, you have to use an anion exchange chromatography. If you use a buffer of 3, you have to use a cation exchange chromatography. Now which one will you use? In generally a buffer has a pi of 7 around. Every buffer has a pi of 6 to 8. That is like the buffer composition that is present here. Okay, so if your protein pi is 5, okay, this is also same. If your protein pi is 5, you have to use an anion exchange chromatography. For example, if your pi of a protein is 8, suppose it's 10, okay, it's 10, then you have to use a cation exchange chromatography. I mean, like, you have a pi of 10, so suppose the pH is 7, okay, and pi is 10, then the pi is less than pH, then you have to use a cation exchange chromatography.
I will be using cation exchange chromatography. Is that only because the protein will exist in positive, means net positive structure which will interfere with the stability?
Yeah. I didn't get your question. Like the protein is positive
No.
charge, na? So you have to use a
No.
cation exchange chromatography. You can't use an anion exchange one.
No, like you said, if the pi of the protein was 10, you said us to use cation exchange chromatography. We can also use anion exchange chromatography if we take the pH as like 14.
Same. Yeah, you can use that. But you know what? Like suppose for example, pi of a protein is 5. Okay. Pi of another protein is 10. Okay. The buffer you can't change the buffer composition much. Theoretically you can, experimentally you can't. So the buffer composition is from 6.0 to 8.0. This is the normal buffer composition. If you change the buffer composition, if it is below 6 or it is more than 8, it will do damage to the protein structure. Okay, it will hamper with the protein structure. You can't change this much. So for example, for a pi of 5.0 and for a pi of 10, here the pH, okay, suppose for example 6 to 8, suppose for example we have the pH is equal to 7, water. Okay, also every buffer is made in water now. So you know, technically, see, for a buffer to have a pi, for a buffer to have a pH of 1, it is acids. Like the acids that is present in batteries, they have a pH of 1 or 2. Okay, and also for example pH, suppose you are changing the buffer pH to 14, that is like caustic soda or anything, like washing powder or anything. They are very, very alkaline. Bleach. Okay, so you can't use bleach or battery acids as a buffer. The main composition of a buffer is water. Okay, so it has a pH of 7 plus some ions. Okay, that changes the pH to plus minus 1. Like for that reason I said pi of 6 to 8 is reasonable. For a protein that has a pi, protein can have different pi of 5 or a pi of 10. For in this case where you have a protein of pi 5, here the pH is, suppose you are using a pH of 7, the pH is more than pi, here the pH is less than pi. Here the protein will exist as a negative charge, here the protein exists as a positive charge. Okay, so this is protein negative, this is protein positive. You have to use an anion exchange. You have to use a cation exchange here. That's all. So depending on the pi of the protein, you have to change the anion exchange or the cation exchange. You can't change the pi of a buffer. See, theoretically you can. Okay, you can use washing powder solution as a buffer, or you can use some battery acid or anything as a buffer, but like you have to change it. You can't, theoretically you can, but technically theoretically you can, but you can't change the pi much. You have to use a cation and anion based on the pi of the protein. Third chromatography that we will use, where is the ink? For what is this? Okay, the third chromatography that we'll use is size exclusion chromatography. Size exclusion. Okay, or you can also say it as gel filtration chromatography. Gel filtration. Basic funda is same. Gel filtration is used, for example, you got a 90% pure protein from affinity chromatography. Affinity. You will use it in gel filtration column to get a protein that is even pure. For example, 99% pure protein. Gel filtration chromatography is used to even purify this affinity chromatography column, like affinity chromatography solution. Few of the things that you need is, number one, you need a concentrated protein. You need a concentrated protein solution for gel filtration. Done. Okay, so this 90% protein, you have to concentrate it and then you have to give it for gel filtration. Okay, so what is gel filtration basically? Okay, so gel filtration is, as I already told, separation based on size. Okay, so you, in a isolate, you have some big proteins, you have some medium proteins, you have some smaller proteins. Okay, so you separate them, like you actually separate like big, small, or like large proteins from them. So now talking about, I'll come into the details about how the separation is happening. Okay, suppose you have now the resin. Okay, the resin that we use is dextran, agarose, like dextran or agarose. Okay, anyway, dextran or agarose or polyacrylamide. You can see everything that is present here na, that has pores. Okay, suppose agarose, if we liquidify agarose and then you give it to dry, like if you, agarose is formed as a powder. Okay, so you heat it, then you cool it, it will form a liquid gel like mesh. So you have gaps in between them, you have gaps in between agarose gel. Okay, you have gaps in between dextran, you have gaps in between agarose, you have gaps in between polyacrylamide. The gap that is present, the pores that differ from compound to compound, but every compound has pores. Okay. Now for example, you have a column. Agarose, like gel filtration columns are very long actually. Suppose you have column. Okay, it is filled with like the base, it's filled with, suppose, agarose. Okay, so you use protein supernatant. Okay, you use protein supernatant. Now it is filled with beads. Okay, agarose beads, or it is very tightly packed agarose beads, or you have like, you know, dextran beads or polyacrylamide beads that are present here. Very packed, very tightly packed, and these beads have gaps in between them. Okay, more specifically I should draw it like this. Suppose agarose beads has a lot of gaps in between them. Okay, so but these are beads, there are many beads that are present here. Okay, there are many beads are present there. Suppose you have large protein compound. Okay, suppose you have large protein, you have medium protein, and you have small protein. The large protein will not enter any bead, it will straight go down. Okay, it will not enter any bead, it will straight go from the middle, and it will go and it will elute. Okay, so as these are not entering into any bead, large compounds will elute first. Okay, now coming into the, these are large. Now coming into the medium ones. Okay, the medium ones will enter few pores. Okay, few of the large pores. For example, the medium one entered this pore, it went from here, the distance it is traveling is more than the large one. Okay, so when this happened continuously from up to down, Okay, so it is entering the pores, it is traveling more distance than this large one, it is traveling more distance than this large one. So what's happening is that the large one is eluting first, because it is not entering any pore, it is taking the shortest route. But the medium one, it is entering the pores and it is taking a little longer route, and it is entering in, and it is like exiting in the middle. Okay, now you have the smallest pore. They will enter each and every pore. They will enter this pore, and then after they will enter another pore. Okay, so they will enter each and every, the small ones will enter each and every small pores. So it will be here, like it will what happened? So yeah, so it will take a long time to come and get eluted. So the smaller protein will elute last. This is the fundamental basis of ion, like size exclusion chromatography. If you do a graph, you can see that there is a peak. Oh, very bad drawing. Okay, you will get a peak, you will get a second peak, you will get a third peak. Okay, this one is for the large protein, this is for the medium protein, this is for the small protein. Okay, this is time. So small protein are taking a longer time to elute than the medium, than the large. Okay, so size exclusion chromatography. Okay, so now you can calibrate the machine, okay, to elute protein of some certain sizes. For example, like you have a gel, you have a so you have a gel filtration, column. Okay, they have a range. What is range? The amount of size they can generate. Okay, so one more thing is that the peak size which is there, the peak will be more. Okay, the peak will be more, like not this, the peak will be more, because small proteins are abundant. Because the small proteins that are present now, they are abundant in lysate. So the smaller peak will be large, just like it has been shown, like it has been seen in experiment. The smaller one, the peak is very large. For example, gel filtration chromatography, they have a range of 60 kDa. For example, it has a range, for example, 60 kDa to 700 kDa. Okay, these are the molecular weight cutoff. Okay, these molecular weight cutoff can be separated using gel filtration chromatography. Okay, different columns have different ranges. It can be 60 to 700, it can be 5 to 10, it can be 50 to 5000, anything. Also yeah, so this is the range. So one more trivia question. For example, if you have a protein, okay, that has 60 kDa, you have a column of 60 kDa to 700 kDa. No, sorry, I have so you have suppose 5 kDa to 700 kDa, 1, you have 2, 5 kDa to 70 kDa. Which one will you use for 60 kDa separation? Comment in the answer box. A I'll repeat the question once. Suppose you have a 60 kDa protein. You have two columns. Okay. The range of the first column is 5 kDa to 700 kDa kilodaltons. Second one is 5 kDa to 70 kDa. Okay. Which column will you use to separate this 60 kDa protein? 1 or 2? Okay, 1, 2, 1. One, two. Okay, great. Okay, the answer is number 2. Okay, because for example, think of it as like this. Think of it like this. Suppose it is 5 kDa to 70 kDa and you have a 60 kDa protein. Okay, if you are using a column which has a very narrow range, it has more separation than for 5 kDa to 70 kDa. This is used to separate a wide range of proteins. This is used to separate a very specific range of proteins. So if you have a 60 kDa protein, you know your protein is 60 kDa because you have done your bioinformatic analysis before. So for a 5 kDa protein to like in a 5 kDa to 70 kDa thing, you have a very narrow range now. So that means the separation is more. So this is a trivia question. Anyway, well, yeah, actually number 2, correct, very correct. So yeah, for the gel filtration, as I already said, that you need a concentrated protein to start with. Okay, to start with, the steps are same. Number 1, you have equilibration. Okay, so this is the last topic that we are dealing with. We'll cover it in few minutes. Yeah, so you have equilibration. Number 2, you have washing. Okay, to remove the non-specific bindings. No, okay, wait for a second. So you have equilibration, then you have sample, then you have like sample, like yeah, so you add sample, adding, then you have washing to remove non-specific bindings, then you have elution. Elution. Here you don't have to use any imidazole or any NaCl rich elution buffer. You just use normal buffer. Okay, just use normal buffer for elution. Okay, suppose for example, okay, you have a long column. You use buffer, then you use your sample, then you use the same buffer. Okay, you don't have to have any difference. The separation will be purely on the basis of beads. Okay, first comes out the large protein, second medium ones, finally smaller ones. Okay, now how will you understand where is your protein? Okay, it is collected in several cuvettes actually. Okay, and this cuvettes has detector. Okay, so we'll come into this in later stages. The detector actually detects like the amino acid that is present there. Like the detector is attached with a spectrophotometer. We'll cover spectrophotometer in the next class. Yes, spectrophotometer. Okay, so you have spectrophotometer that uses 280 nanometer of light to detect if there is protein in the elution fragment or not. Okay, so yeah, so that reading that I showed you na, that is spectrophotometer reading. So that is spectrophotometer reading only. Okay, so it's like, it was like buffer, large protein, buffer, medium ones, buffer, small ones. Done. So you can detect where your protein is using this graph, and yeah, that is all. And also you have, okay, so suppose you have column, okay, it's an important terminology is there. You have beads here, okay. The total volume is Vt is equal to total volume, like the total volume that is present here, the total volume of this column, okay. Now you have V0, okay, which is void volume. Void volume is the free spaces that are present here. These free spaces are void volume. You have Vx, which is bead volume, that is volume occupied by beads there. So just for your knowledge, the mathematical formula is Vt is equal to V0 plus Vx. Total volume is equal to void volume plus volume occupied by the beads. This is clearly shown here. This is the volume occupied by the beads. So if you add these, like this volume with the free spaces, you get the total volume. This is just a mathematical formula of it. And one more thing that is present here is that how to increase separation, okay. This is a question. We are in the finishing, we are about to finish our today's lecture. So suppose you need to improve the purification using gel filtration. How will you do it? Number one step is increasing the column length. So if you increase the length of the column, it will take more time for the medium to pass through every beads. It will take, the path will be longer, okay. So it will give you a more separation, it will give you a better separation. So increasing the column length, normally these columns are very long, okay. These columns are sometimes they can be from few inches to few feet also. You can get gel columns up to 2 feet or up to 6 feet, 10 feet. You can get very long gel columns. So increasing the gel columns actually increases separation, the quality of the separation. Number two, you can use a HPLC or high pressure liquid chromatography, okay. High pressure liquid chromatography. What is a high pressure liquid chromatography? It is nothing, okay. So yeah, okay. So what is high pressure liquid chromatography? It is nothing but a instrument, okay. The separation that is done in these columns, they can be due to gravity, okay. These columns are upside down, so due to gravity the entire column passes from up to down, okay. The entire supernatant passes from up to down due to gravity. Number two, you can use pressure, okay, to force the supernatant to pass down. But this using pressure with this size exclusion chromatography is called HPLC. High pressure, because you are using pressure for the separation, and liquid, because the supernatant is liquid, chromatography. High pressure liquid chromatography is basically using pressure as a medium to separate the proteins in a size exclusion chromatography. Yeah. So I think I've told everything. So yeah, if you guys have any question, you can ask us.
Rishabh, during ion exchange chromatography, when you talked about buffer, so how we are going to select the buffer? Like for every different protein, we have to select different buffer. So what would be the criteria of selecting the buffer?
Okay, so yeah, sure. So buffer, so selecting the buffer, okay, wait. So see, the first case of the buffer, like first component of the buffer is water. Then like, okay, criteria. So buffer selection. Buffer selection. Okay. Number one is you should select that buffer where the protein is soluble, like soluble and stable. Okay. Generally, we don't change the buffer much. For example, the pH of the buffer should be around the pi of protein. Okay, it should not be same. Okay, it should be slightly great. It should be slightly more or slightly less than the pi of the protein. For example, the pi of a protein is suppose 5.6. You should choose a buffer that is plus minus 1. So the buffer should be 4.6 to 6.6. Okay, that is like the range. You can also use up to 6.6 or like up to 10, up to 6.6 or up to 7.0. You can use buffer in these range. Okay, by changing the buffer drastically, it, like for example, if you change the buffer composition drastically, it will affect your protein structure. Okay, okay, so yeah, what they have shown is that generally the buffer stays around neutral pH. So buffer is like buffer revolves around the neutral pH. So yeah, these are the two criteria. The protein should be stable and protein should be soluble in the buffer. Number third criteria is buffer should be around in the neutral pH, like around 7, 6 to 8. That's why I said 6 to 8, because here the most of the protein are soluble and everything, and most of the protein has pi of like around 6 to 8 only. So you use buffer in that region. And yeah, it's like technically they use PBS or phosphate buffer solution, but you can use an other buffer if you need in your experiments. During size exclusion chromatography, is it possible that some supernatant is stuck in between the columns and unable to make space through it? Okay, so actually it does, because you can't expect everything to get through the columns or anything. There will be proteins which will get stuck into the column, but like technically not all of them, because there are multiple beads. Okay, there are not 5 or 10 beads, there are like thousands and thousands of beads. So if few of the protein got stuck in some of the beads, also the rest of the protein flows through the other beads as well. There is no problem about that. So yeah, that's. Have any other questions?
Rishabh, in response to the answer you gave, I have like simple doubt that when I came across while I was reading this as well.
Sure.
So if I use a acidic buffer, say suppose which have a pH of 5, okay, so we avoid using that only because that the buffer may like interact with the protein, means protein of interest.
Yeah.
Is that the only reason?
For example, see, there are very few protein which have a pi of very less. Okay, so technically, the pi of a protein revolves around the neutral pH only, because the protein are made of many amino acids. You have some hydrophobic amino acid, you have some hydrophilic amino acid that are negative charge and positive charge. So technically you have some negative charge amino acids and you have some positive charge amino acid at the same time. So that cancels each other, and technically the pi of a protein revolves around the neutral pH only. So technically you don't have to use a very acidic or very basic buffer, but you can experimentally, you can. Suppose your protein has a pi of 4, you have to use a buffer of around 5. You shouldn't use a buffer of like 3, because that is too much acidic for the protein. Okay, too much acid can also react with the protein and it can change its configuration. So you should actually use, theoretically you can use a buffer of around 5, yeah, if your protein has a pi of 4. Yeah, so okay, so Shancharika, don't call me sir, you can call me Dada. Okay, Rishabda will be enough. So in reference to my previous question, is it not necessary to filter the stuck protein if done? How? Okay, so see, the stuck protein, okay, so there is a major problem using size exclusion chromatography. Okay, if your protein gets, what's happening, if your protein gets precipitated, oh, what is happening now? Okay, so I'll speak anyway. Okay, so one of the major challenge with size exclusion chromatography is that if your protein gets, firstly, though, you can't use size exclusion columns much. Okay, if you use that same size exclusion column for years and years and years and years, your purification will reduce, because the number of protein that is stuck into the beads, they get like those who are stuck into the beads, they started increasing, and after some time you can't use that column. That is number one. Number two that you have is, if you have some protein that is stuck into the column, one of the way in which you can purify is that you have to run buffer. You have to use buffer in high pressure. Okay, so this is also called as cleaning, like cleaning the why is things, I don't know. Anyway, I'll speak. Okay, so yeah, so you have to clean your column sometimes, okay, using buffer in high pressure. So you are not using any protein, you are just using buffer, and you are using high pressure. High pressure will force those stuck proteins out of the beads. That is one way how you can clean the column. You have to replace the column after few years. Okay, you can't use it for like long enough, and yeah, and that's all. And also, like, some protein will get stuck into the column. That will happen anyway. Okay. And yeah, it is necessary to filter those stuck proteins. That is why people change their column after few, like after using it for few years and stuff. And also they clean the column sometimes. And if your protein gets precipitated inside your column, that is a major problem, because once your protein gets precipitated inside the column, you have no other way, like you have to throw that column away. You can't use that column for further experiments. So yeah, have any questions more? Okay, so yeah, I think I did not Yeah, so if you guys have any question, guys can always approach us. You can call us, you can WhatsApp us, you can email us with your doubts, and yeah, we'll be